I was the silent partner, the one funding the festive cheer from 800 miles away. While my family took the credit, I'd pay the mortgage, the utilities, the bills that kept their lights on and their holiday celebrations alive. It was my way of being part of the family, even when I wasn't there. But last December, something shifted. The familiar email chain from my mother never came. My texts went unanswered. The silence was louder than any argument. And then, I uncovered the truth that they had a group chat I wasn't in, a place where they decided to cut me out of Christmas and their lives for good. This is not just a story about being excluded. It's about what happens when you realize your love was just a transaction. Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you'd consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Sarah, and for as long as I can remember, I was the ghost in my family's machine. I was the architect of their comfort, the silent partner funding the festive cheer from 800 miles away. My apartment in Durham was small and quiet, a stark contrast to the sprawling house in New York, where my family's laughter echoed through halls I rarely walked, while my brother was sharing pictures of his kids laughing in front of the fireplace. I was the one paying the mortgage bill, the electric bill, the various other utilities that kept their lights on and their holiday celebrations alive. It was my way of being part of the family, even when I wasn't there. A silent sacrifice that felt like an unspoken duty. I told myself it was what a good daughter, a good sister, was supposed to do. I was the professional, the data analyst with a stable job, the one who didn't need to be home for the holidays because I was already there in the bills, in the warmth, in the convenience. Every year, the holiday season would officially begin with a flurry of emails from my mother, Helen. She was the matriarch, the master planner of the family's Christmas traditions. There would be detailed spreadsheets about who was bringing what dish to dinner, lists of gift ideas for everyone, and a long-winded schedule for the entire week. It was a chaotic but comforting ritual. This time, my inbox was blank. I refreshed the screen once, then again, then a third time. But there was nothing. No subject lines with Christmas in all caps, no dramatic reminders about labeling serving spoons, just a deafening silence. I told myself maybe they hadn't started planning yet. But a silence this exact, this clean, is never accidental. It felt deliberate, like a quiet kind of rejection I had felt before. A subtle shift in the air when I walked into a room. My phone buzzed beside me. A text from my mother. Helen lit the screen. Her words were simple. "Don't worry, I figured you'd be busy this year. No need to stress about Christmas." There was no "we miss you." No, "I hope you can make it." Just a sentence that sounded more like a dismissal than a gesture of care. I stared at it until the screen dimmed, the glow fading as if it was shutting me out too. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. I wasn't crying. I had stopped crying over predictable things years ago. But there was a heaviness in my chest, a press of something I could not quite swallow. It felt like a door closing with a finality I could not ignore. I thought of last year, a memory that now carried a new, sharper edge. I had arrived at the house later than planned, stuck in traffic after a client meeting. My arms had been full of wrapped gifts, my hands sticky from carrying a tray of cookies I had baked at 2 in the morning. When I stepped into the kitchen, not a single person looked up. The dining table was full, every chair taken. My sister Caroline glanced at me and smirked. "Look who finally decided to show." Laughter followed, and no one moved a chair. No one made room. I ended up balancing a paper plate at the counter, eating standing up while my relatives toasted each other in the next room. I told myself then it was a mistake, just stress or holiday chaos. But now, sitting in my apartment with that new text message burning in my pocket, it did not feel like an accident. It felt orchestrated, like a meeting had been held and my name had been struck from the list. The coffee had gone cold. I poured it into the sink and watched the brown swirl vanish down the drain. Outside, The street was bright with neighbors stringing up lights, the sound of children shouting as they ran between yards. Inside, the air was heavy. I closed the laptop not because there was nothing more to look for, but because I already knew what I would not find. That morning settled into me the way frost settles on glass, thin and invisible until you breathe and realize you cannot see through it anymore. The phone rang just after 9 that night while I was brushing my teeth. I glanced at the screen and saw the word mom in capital letters. I let it go to voicemail. When the chime indicated a new message, I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed play. Her voice filled the room. Flat and too rehearsed, we all agreed. You are not welcome at Christmas. There was no hesitation, no sadness, no attempt to soften the words. It sounded less like a mother struggling with a choice and more like a boardroom decision handed down without appeal. I sat very still, my thumb hovering above the screen. By the second replay, I was saving it. My fingers were steady. Even as my stomach nodded, I knew I would want that recording later. Proof. After I listened to that voicemail, the words hanging in the air like a cold, final judgment, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a sudden, violent crack, but a quiet, methodical settling. The pain I had expected was replaced by a hollow clarity. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt used. I realized my initial desire to fix things was based on a lie. They didn't see me as a person to be included, but as a problem to be solved. So I sat in the quiet of my apartment, not with a broken heart, but with a cold, simmering rage that felt logical, almost analytical. My new objective was not reconciliation. My new objective was proof. I needed to see the full extent of their betrayal, to quantify it, to make it as real and undeniable as the numbers I worked with every day. I began my deep dive into the digital graveyard of my family's interactions. The process was slow and methodical. I meticulously searched my personal cloud storage, bank statements, and email confirmations. I found a spreadsheet from last year detailing every single gift. My name was nowhere on the list. I had bought a new laptop for my niece, something my brother had mentioned she needed for school. I found the invoice for the purchase, but the spreadsheet credited the gift to my parents, my sister, and my brother, from all of us. The betrayal was a physical weight on my chest. It wasn't just my presence they wanted to erase. It was my generosity, my effort, my love. My search expanded. I found an email from my sister, Caroline, from 2 Christmases ago. The subject line was a simple, "Help with the bills." The body of the email was brief. "We're a little short on the heating bill this month. Could you spot us?" I had responded instantly. The money transferred within the hour. Now, with a new, bitter clarity, I realized that I was nothing more than a convenient solution, an endless resource they could tap into without a second thought. They saw me as a utility, not a human being. This realization was the true conflict. It wasn't just about being uninvited to a holiday dinner. It was about having my love and sacrifice systematically devalued and exploited. And the desire, my new and all-consuming desire, was to break free from that illusion, to show them, not with words, but with action. What happens when you cut the supply line of a person you had taken for granted for far too long? With my case built, I contacted my lawyer, a trusted friend from my firm. I told him I needed to legally and permanently remove my name from every financial agreement tied to my family. I sent him the cost spreadsheet, and when he saw it, he was stunned. "I've never seen anything like this," he told me, his voice full of disbelief. I simply responded, "This isn't a lawsuit, it's a statement." I knew that once I took this step, there would be no going back. But I also knew I could no longer live as a ghost, a silent benefactor they only acknowledged when they needed money. My action would be my voice, my proof, and my final word. The moment of truth arrived on Christmas Eve. My apartment was quiet and dark, deliberately so. I hadn't decorated, hadn't bought a tree, hadn't even lit a candle. The silence of my own space was a stark contrast to the loud, festive chaos I knew was happening back in New York, with a calm I didn't recognize in myself. I logged into my bank accounts, My fingers, steady and sure, navigated the menus, canceling every automatic payment, every standing order, every single financial thread that connected me to my family's life. With a few clicks, their mortgage payment, the utility bills, the internet, everything went from pending to canceled. I didn't feel a triumphant rush or a surge of anger. I just felt quiet. This wasn't a revenge plot. It was an act of surgical detachment. The first frantic text came in just before dinner time. It was from my sister, Caroline. The power went out. What is going on? I watched the text pop up on my screen, a tiny flicker of their panic. I didn't reply. A minute later, a text from my brother-in-law, Brian, full of technical jargon about a rejected payment and a sudden disconnection. Then, a call from my mother, Helen. I let it go to voicemail. I needed to hear their words, but not in real time. I needed the distance to process their shock. The voicemails came in one after another, each one more frantic than the last. First, a confused and frustrated message from my father about the heater failing in the middle of a cold snap. Then, a shriek from my sister about the Christmas ham that was now sitting uncooked in a powerless oven. The messages started to become more accusatory. What have you done? Sarah, your card was declined. This is all on you. It was as if their world, built on my silent support, was suddenly crumbling, and they couldn't comprehend why. I wasn't a person to them. I was a resource, and that resource had just dried up. Then came the final, gut-wrenching moment. My phone rang with a video call from my mother. I hesitated for a moment, then answered, propping my phone up on the kitchen counter so they could see my face. My mother's face was pale, streaked with tears, and the background was dark. I could see my sister and father hovering behind her, their faces etched with fear and confusion. Could you help us, Sarah? My mother pleaded, her voice trembling. Your father hasn't had his medication, and we don't have a single cent to pay for it. Her words, meant to be a plea, felt like a final act of manipulation. She was using my father's health as a weapon, a last-ditch effort to pull me back in. I looked at the screen, at their faces. I saw their desperation, but for the first time. I also saw their utter helplessness without me. I had so many things I could have said. I could have screamed at them, told them about the years of silent contributions, about the group chat, about the voicemail, but I didn't say a word. I just looked at the screen, my face a mask of cold, quiet resolve. My silence was louder than any words I could have spoken. My lack of action was my final, crushing response after a long, agonizing moment of dead air. I simply reached for the phone and ended the call. After ending the call, I lived my life in quiet solitude, free from the constant pull of family obligations. A few weeks later, my lawyer called. They've hired a lawyer, he said. They're trying to sue you for cutting them off. But I sent them a copy of your spreadsheet. They've dropped the lawsuit. There's nothing they can do. I listened calmly, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. It wasn't triumph, not glee, but a strange, liberating emptiness. I no longer had to worry about their comfort, their finances, or their happiness. My life slowly began to normalize. I started doing things I had never had the time or money for. I joined a running club, took a pottery class, and spent my weekends exploring the trails near my apartment. I had found peace in the very solitude they had created for me. I had finally learned that walking away wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of self-preservation. They had tried to erase me from their lives, but they didn't know that in doing so, I had severed their dependence on me. One day, I was walking down the street when I ran into an old neighbor from my parents' hometown. She approached me with a look of pity. "I'm so sorry for what happened," she said. "Your mother has been telling everyone you're mentally unstable and that you ruined their Christmas." I just smiled, a gentle, genuine smile, and said, "I'm doing great. Thank you for your concern. Have a good day." I walked on, leaving her standing there, confused. I finally understood that I no longer needed their approval or their forgiveness. I didn't need to be part of a family that only saw me as a transaction. I had found my own peace, my own freedom. I had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to freeze the accounts of your sacrifice and step into the light of your own life.